You ever meet someone so powerful, so arrogant, they actually think they can fight God? Yeah. History has one of those guys, a king, rich, ruthless, feared, but here's the shocking truth. He learned the hard way that no crown is heavy enough to crush the truth of Allah. Let's break this story down into 4 powerful lessons, fast, raw, and real. You ever notice how power has this crazy way of making people forget reality? It's like the more someone stacks up money, influence, or followers, the more they start thinking they're untouchable. And that's exactly what happened with this king. He wasn't just rich, he wasn't just feared. He was living in a bubble so thick that he actually thought he didn't need God. Imagine that level of delusion. He wakes up every morning in his golden palace, servants rushing around, people bowing down, soldiers saluting. And over time, he starts believing the hype. He convinces himself that he's the source, the provider, the one pulling all the strings. And that arrogance, man, it didn't just creep in, it took over his soul. Now think about it. It's not just kings, right? We see this in our own lives. Someone gets a promotion at work, and suddenly they talk to people like they invented oxygen. Or someone finally gets the car they've been dreaming about, and boom, they're driving like they own the road and everyone else is just background extras in their movie. Arrogance is sneaky. It doesn't hit you overnight, it builds up. A compliment here, a win there, a little bit of success, and suddenly the heart swells so much that there's no room left for humility. That's what this king embodied. He wasn't just confident. Confidence is good, confidence is healthy. He was drowning in ego, and ego is the poison that kills gratitude. And here's the kicker. Gratitude is the anchor that keeps success from pulling you away from reality. Without it, you drift. This king drifted so far, he thought worshipping Allah was beneath him. He looked at himself, his power, his wealth, and said, "Why do I need God? People already treat me like one." That's not confidence anymore, that's straight-up delusion, and arrogance like that, it blinds you. You can't even see the obvious truth anymore. Imagine standing under the sun and denying that there's light. That's what arrogance does. It makes you ignore the source of your blessings while you stand there acting like you created them yourself. And it's funny, right? Because deep down, everyone knows that power can vanish in a second. One bad night, one wrong decision, one twist of fate, and all that wealth, all that status can crumble. But arrogance whispers in your ear, "Nah, you're different. You're permanent. Nothing can touch you." That's the lie this king bought into. He wasn't just sitting on a throne, he was sitting on an illusion, and illusions always break. Now, let's be real here. How often do we fall into many versions of this? Maybe not on a kingdom level, but in our own little worlds. You ace an exam, and suddenly you forget the sleepless nights and the duas you made. And instead you're like, "Yeah, I'm just smarter than everyone else." You get a raise, and instead of thanking Allah, you start flexing like you were destined to be the CEO of the universe. See how sneaky it is? It's the same disease, just different sizes. The king's arrogance was massive because his platform was massive. But the root problem, same as ours, forgetting the source, and here's the raw truth. Every blessing you have is on loan. Your health, your money, your status, even the breath in your lungs. None of it is yours permanently. The king didn't get that memo. He thought ownership meant eternal control. He thought sitting on a throne meant being untouchable. But life doesn't work like that. You don't own the blessings, you're entrusted with them. And arrogance, that's like refusing to pay rent on blessings you're just borrowing. What's wild is that the king's arrogance didn't just hurt him, it infected everyone around him too. When the guy at the top is blind with ego, the whole system bends around that delusion. His advisors stop telling the truth, his people start feeding his pride, his enemies tremble. And all of it makes the ego grow even bigger. It's like feeding a monster, and once that monster is full, grown, good luck trying to bring it back under control. That's why arrogance is so dangerous. It doesn't just stay in your heart. It spills out into your actions, your decisions, your relationships. And the higher you climb while carrying it, the harder the fall when reality finally catches up. So picture this king sitting on his throne, draped in silk, gold shining, crown tilted just right, looking down on everyone like ants, and in his mind he's thinking, I am the source, I am the giver, I am the one who decides, but in truth, he's just a man, flesh, bones, weaknesses like the rest of us. He bleeds, he gets tired, he can't even stop himself from aging, and yet he thought he could defy the very one who gave him life in the first place. That's arrogance in its purest form, forgetting that no matter how high you rise, you're still a creation, not the creator. And here's where the story hits like a punch. Because the moment you forget the source of your blessings, those blessings can become the very thing that destroys you. Power without humility becomes oppression. Wealth without gratitude becomes greed. Success without faith becomes arrogance. And arrogance, it's not just a flaw, it's a setup for downfall. The king thought he was untouchable, but in reality, he was building the stage for his own humiliation. Because if arrogance was his disease, wait till you hear the crazy cure Allah sent his way. So here's where it gets really interesting. You've got this king sitting in his palace, drowning in ego, thinking he's above everyone and everything. And then, out of nowhere, comes someone who doesn't flinch at his power, doesn't bow to his throne, doesn't even blink at the intimidation. That someone was Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him. Now think about that for a second. Imagine the courage it takes to stand in front of a man who literally holds the power of life and death in his kingdom, and instead of flattering him, you tell him straight up, you're not the one in charge. Allah is. That's not just bravery, that's conviction. That's clarity of truth so sharp it cuts through the fog of arrogance like a blade. The king, of course, wasn't used to being challenged. When you're surrounded by yes, men all day, the last thing you want is someone dropping truth bombs in your face. But Ibrahim wasn't there to win arguments. He was there to remind the king, and by extension all of us, that no matter how big you think you are, you're still under the command of the one who created you. So Ibrahim lays it out clean. My Lord gives life and death. Simple, profound, undeniable. And if the king had even a shred of humility left in his heart, he would have paused, he would have thought, but arrogance doesn't allow room for reflection. Arrogance only cares about winning. So what does the king do? He tries to play games. He takes out 2 prisoners. He kills one. He spares the other. Then with that smug smirk only arrogance can produce, he says, see, I give life and death too. Can you believe that? That's like someone claiming they invented fire because they struck 2 rocks together. It's missing the point so badly it's almost laughable. Life and death isn't about sparing one man and killing another. It's about who puts the soul in the body in the first place, who decides when the heart beats and when it stops. But the king, blinded by his ego, thought he had checkmated a prophet. This right here is where you see the clash between truth and arrogance in its rawest form. On one side, you've got Ibrahim, calm, collected, unshaken, dropping wisdom like it's second nature. On the other, you've got the king, desperate to cling to his illusion of power, twisting logic to make himself look invincible. And isn't that exactly what arrogance does to people? It makes them argue nonsense, just so they don't have to admit they're wrong. You've probably seen it too. Someone knows they messed up, but instead of admitting it, they double down with the wildest excuses. That's arrogance at work. It's not about the truth anymore, it's about saving face. What strikes me here is the contrast. Ibrahim didn't need theatrics. He didn't need an army. He didn't even raise his voice, because when you're speaking the truth, you don't need to shout. Truth has its own weight. It sits heavy, and the king felt that weight. You can tell because instead of listening, he rushed to twist the argument. That's what insecure people do when they feel cornered. They scramble. They reach for anything, even if it makes no sense, just to avoid facing reality. And the reality was staring him in the face. He wasn't in control. He never was. Now, put yourself there for a moment. Imagine being in the court, watching this exchange. You've got guards, advisors, noblemen all sitting around, probably waiting for Ibrahim to crumble under pressure. But instead, it's the king who looks ridiculous, using a cheap trick to claim divinity. Can you picture the silence that must have fallen in that room? People whispering, exchanging glances, maybe even thinking to themselves, wait, is the king serious? That's the best he's got. Because deep down, even his own people must have seen through it. Arrogance might scare people into silence, but it can't convince the heart. The heart knows the truth when it hears it, and that's why this moment is so powerful. It's not just a debate. It's not just a prophet talking to a king. It's a timeless showdown between truth and delusion, humility and arrogance, reality and illusion, and every single one of us lives out smaller versions of that clash in our lives. Anytime you're faced with someone puffed up with ego, someone who twists logic just to prove they're right, you're witnessing the same dynamic. And the lesson: stay calm, stay grounded, don't get dragged into their theatrics. Because the truth doesn't need fireworks, it just needs to be spoken. The king, though, wasn't ready to surrender. His pride wouldn't let him, and here's the thing about pride: the more you cling to it, the more ridiculous you look. It's like holding onto a rope that's on fire. You're only burning yourself, but you're too stubborn to let go. That was this king. He thought sparing one man and killing another made him equal to God. He thought that by twisting the argument he could walk away as the winner, but the reality, he only exposed how fragile his so-called power really was. Because if your proof of divinity relies on killing innocent people, that's not strength. That's weakness dressed up as authority. And this is where the story takes its sharp turn. Because if logic couldn't humble him, if truth spoken clearly to his face couldn't make him reflect, then what comes next is even more shocking. Allah doesn't need big armies or blazing miracles to take down arrogance. Sometimes the smallest, most unexpected thing can be the ultimate equalizer. Because when logic couldn't humble him, Allah used something much smaller, something he couldn't swat away. And now comes the twist nobody saw coming. Because if you were writing this story as a movie, you'd expect some giant army rolling in, thunder cracking, the skies splitting open. Something dramatic to bring the king down. That's how human beings think. Big problems need big solutions. But Allah's way, different, smarter, sharper. He doesn't need grand explosions to prove a point. Sometimes the loudest lesson comes from the quietest messenger. And in this case, it wasn't a storm, it wasn't fire, it wasn't even another prophet sent to challenge him. It was a mosquito. Yeah, you heard me right, a mosquito. Now, pause and just let that sink in. This king, who strutted around like the universe was under his control, who thought he was untouchable, who played games with life and death. His downfall started with one of the smallest creatures on earth. It's poetic, really. It's like Allah was saying, you think you're big, let me show you how small you really are. And honestly, isn't that how life works sometimes? You brace yourself for the giant battles, and then it's the little things that actually knock you down. Not the mountain you were worried about, but the pebble in your shoe that trips you up. That's the power of Allah's wisdom. He doesn't just crush arrogance, he humiliates it. So this mosquito goes straight up the king's nose. And from there, it became a living nightmare. Day after day, he was tormented. The buzzing, the pain, the irritation. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, he couldn't think straight. Imagine being the man everyone feared, the man people bowed to, reduced to begging for relief from something so tiny you can barely see it. The irony is brutal. The same people who once trembled at his presence now probably watched him crumble in pity. All the armies, all the wealth, all the crowns, none of it could fight off one mosquito. That's the lesson right there. You can build walls as high as the sky, surround yourself with guards, stack up treasures. But when Allah decides to humble you, there's no defense strong enough. And here's the wildest part. The only thing that gave him any momentary relief was when his servants would hit his head with shoes. Think about that image for a second. A king in royal robes sitting on his golden throne, while people literally smack his head with sandals just so he can feel some ease. That's humiliation at its peak, from demanding worship to begging for shoe slaps. If that's not a fall from glory, I don't know what is. It's the ultimate reminder that arrogance always ends in humiliation. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually pride eats itself alive. Now, I don't know about you, but this part of the story gets me every time because it's so relatable on a smaller scale. Haven't you seen people get taken down by the tiniest things? The guy who thinks he's invincible suddenly gets laid flat by a sickness. The business tycoon who thought money made him immortal gets wrecked by stress. Even in our own lives, sometimes the little stuff humbles us. The moment you trip while trying to look cool, or that one tiny mistake that costs you big. It's the same principle, just scaled down. Allah has infinite ways to remind us we're not in control. And the king, he had all the chances in the world to repent, to see the truth, to humble himself, but arrogance is stubborn. It doesn't just leave, it clings. Instead of turning to Allah, he just kept suffering until eventually it destroyed him. That's the thing about arrogance. It convinces you that surrendering is weakness, when in reality, surrender to Allah is the only strength that lasts. This king chose pride over humility, and pride ate him alive from the inside out. Now picture that courtroom again, the same place where he once tried to play God in front of Ibrahim. Imagine the whispers, the rumors spreading across the land, the mighty king. He's tormented by a mosquito. You can almost hear the disbelief in their voices. It's like the whole empire became a living reminder that no matter how high you climb, if you forget Allah, you're one heartbeat, one accident, one mosquito away from collapse. That's not weakness, that's reality. And that's why this story slaps so hard. It's not about a king from centuries ago, it's about us right now. What's your mosquito? What tiny thing could expose your weakness if you let arrogance take over? Maybe it's your health, maybe it's your job, maybe it's something as simple as your patience. The point is, if we don't ground ourselves in humility, life has a way of sending us our own mosquito moments. Not to destroy us, but to remind us, to snap us out of our illusions, to make us see clearly that power, wealth, and pride are nothing compared to the one who created us. And here's the beauty of it. Humility doesn't mean weakness. It means clarity. It means knowing that no matter how successful you get, you're still human, you're still dependent, you're still in need of Allah's mercy every single day. The king refused to accept that, and so the smallest soldier of Allah was enough to bring him to his knees. Because that's the power of Allah's wisdom. Sometimes your biggest enemy isn't a tank or a sword. It's something you can't even see coming. And this is where the story lands with its hardest punch. Because look around. Where is that king now? Where are his palaces, his armies, his gold gone? Dust buried under centuries of forgotten stones. You can't even find a trace of the empire he thought would last forever. That's the irony of arrogance. It makes you think you're building something permanent, but really, you're just stacking sandcastles against the tide. One wave, and it all washes away. His pride, his titles, his so-called divinity. Nothing lasted. The only thing that survived was the lesson, and that lesson still echoes louder than his throne ever did. Think about that for a second. We don't sit around talking about his wealth, his military strategies, or his royal decrees. Nobody remembers his court ceremonies or the songs his people sang in his honor. All of that has disappeared into silence. The only thing we remember is how arrogance destroyed him. That's his legacy. And honestly, isn't that the only legacy arrogance ever leaves? Nobody writes history books celebrating the ego of tyrants. They're remembered as warnings, not as heroes. Now let's pull this into our world. How many people do we know, celebrities, leaders, influencers, even people in our own circles, who are chasing that same illusion? They think if they build big enough, if they stack enough money, if they grab enough followers, they'll live forever in people's minds. But here's the truth. The fame fades, the wealth slips, the spotlight moves on, time is undefeated. The only thing that sticks is the impact you leave behind, good or bad. That king left arrogance, and that's all he's remembered for. But people like Ibrahim, humility, faith, truth, and those names are still alive, still respected, still guiding hearts centuries later. That's the real power play here, not how high you climb, but how grounded you stay. Because life has this way of flipping the script. One moment you're at the top, and the next, you're praying for mercy, begging for help, or worse, forgotten altogether. The king didn't see that. He thought his crown was a shield. He thought his throne was eternal. But crowns rust, thrones crumble, and arrogance rots everything it touches. That's why Allah humbled him with something as small as a mosquito. Because the point wasn't just to end him, the point was to show the whole world that no one is too big to fall. And I think this is where the story becomes personal, because it's easy to point at that king and laugh at his stupidity, but the truth is, we've all got our minith, roans, our jobs, our money, our cars, our achievements. We sit on these little pedestals and sometimes start believing we're the ones running the show, but just like him, we're fragile. One illness, one accident, one test from Allah, and suddenly we're reminded we were never in control. The real question is, do we remember that before our mosquito moment? Or do we wait until life forces us down? The beauty of Islam is that it flips the script on what power really means. The king thought power was making people bow to him. Ibrahim knew power was bowing to Allah. The king thought strength was in control. Ibrahim knew strength was in surrender, and at the end of the day, whose name do we still honor? Not the man with the crown, but the man with the faith. That's the kind of legacy worth chasing. Not castles that turn to rubble, but lessons that outlive you. And here's the kicker. The king didn't just lose his throne, he lost his dignity. He's remembered as a cautionary tale. The image of him being tormented by a mosquito, begging for relief, that's what survives. That's how arrogance works. It builds you up just to drop you harder. But humility never embarrasses you. Humility protects you. It keeps you from becoming the punchline of your own story. That's why the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "No one humbles themselves for the sake of Allah except that Allah raises them." That's the formula. Lower yourself before him, and he elevates you in ways a crown never could. So when we think about this king, the real takeaway isn't just, wow, what a fool. The real takeaway is, don't let that be you. Don't let your blessings turn into your downfall. Don't wait until a mosquito or whatever form your test comes in reminds you that you're not in charge. Walk with humility now. Recognize the source now. Because every blessing you have, your health, your family, your opportunities, is temporary. Treat them with gratitude or watch them turn into trials. And that's why this story has lasted all these centuries. Not because of the king's power, but because of Allah's lesson. The kind of lesson that makes you stop scrolling, stop rushing, and just think for a second. Who do I want to be remembered as? The one who built palaces and lost it all, or the one who lived humbly and gained everything that lasts? That's the question this story forces into your heart. Because at the end of the day, kings fall, palaces crumble. But lessons from Allah, those last forever.